Welcome back, everybody, to episode 4 of the That's DPI podcast. I'm Zach, and that's Tyler over there. And we're so excited to bring you episode 4. We want to thank you guys so much for the support on the last 3 episodes. We're just pumped to get into some more off-season content. This episode, we're going to cover some rule and bylaw changes that teams have proposed during the off-season, and then we're going to jump into a segment that I have lovingly called How on Earth Do Contracts Work? We're going to cover all of your contract questions in the latter half of this segment. But starting off with our rule change highlights here, Tyler, what rules have NFL teams wanted to change this season?
So teams have proposed the idea to ban the Tush Push. That goes along with Rule 12, Section 1. The Green Bay Packers proposed that one. Other rule changes, both proposed by the Detroit Lions, have been to eliminate automatic first downs for defensive holding and illegal contact. And then the other rule change up for proposal is to align the regular season overtime rules with the current playoff overtime rules, meaning that in the regular season, you would allow both teams the opportunity to possess the ball, even if the first team scores a touchdown. That's currently how it is in the playoffs, but it's not like that in the regular season right now.
I'll offer a quick correction. The Eagles actually proposed that last one relating to the overtime rules. However, the Lions did propose both bylaw changes that I'm going to cover right now. The first being change the playoff seeding format to be solely based on win percentage, with and this could obviously see wildcard teams being seeded above division winners. So obviously this came to a head last season when the 14-2 Lions faced off against the 14-2 Minnesota Vikings, the winner being the number 1 seed and the loser dropping all the way down to the 5th seed and losing their division and playing no home playoff games. So the Lions actually benefited from that. They got the first seed, but they still want that rule changed. They proposed it this offseason. And the final rule is players placed on IR before final cuts to start the season. Those players placed on IR do not count towards the 90-man roster limit. So basically, if you have a player suffering a season-ending injury in training camp, you place him on IR. He does not count towards your roster limit throughout the season. Just allows teams to be more flexible and sign more players and address injuries, which is another thing that the Lions had to deal with more than any other team last season, and it's a big reason why they're proposing that rule. But I wanted to jump right in to a discussion about the Tush Push. I think we disagree on this one, and I want to hear your thoughts first. Do the Packers banning the Tush Push, do you agree or disagree with the Packers?
I agree with the Packers, meaning I do believe we should ban the Tush Push. Now, this is not me being a Chiefs fan that's sorry, like, oh, the Eagles are too good at it. No, that's not why I disagree. The reason I disagree with the Tush Push is because currently in the NFL, there is a rule that bans defensive players from propelling another defensive runner forward. So if you are not allowed as a defensive player to push a player forward, then you should not be allowed as an offensive player to push a player forward. That's my biggest reason for why they should ban the Tush Push.
Interesting. So I'm going to disagree with you solely because of the full verbiage of the rule change. The full verbiage states that the Packers want to prohibit an offensive player from pushing a teammate who is lined up directly behind the snapper and receives the snap immediately at the snap. So that's a lot of words saying basically, as soon as the ball is snapped, no player lined up directly behind the quarterback is allowed to push the quarterback. This does not prohibit pushing offensive players after the snap. If you get into a pileup at the end of a play and you push your teammate, similar to how a couple of years ago David Montgomery was stuck in the middle of a bunch of offensive linemen and defensive linemen, Penei Sewell came from behind and pushed them all 10 yards further, that would still be allowed under NFL rules. Just the immediate pushing by a player lined up directly behind the quarterback would be prohibited. So it's strictly a ban of the tush push play. And I think that unless you're going to take away all pushing of offensive players, then I don't agree with the Packers rule. I think that this is solely them not being able to do the play as well as the Eagles. Because your point being that the defensive players can't push their teammates, that's true, but this doesn't eliminate pushing. This just eliminates tush pushing. And I think that that's foolish if we're going to single out a single play. The Eagles just do it better than anybody else.
And that's true. And honestly, for a while, like even after Super Bowl 57, where the Eagles almost beat us solely because of the tush push, I was not in favor of banning the tush push. I was like, you got to figure it out. It was only until it was pointed out to me about that rule where there is a limitation of when defensive players are not allowed to push each other. Similar to what you said with the pile. Of course, you're going to push the pile to try and stop the momentum. You're allowed to do that. But there are certain situations where a defensive player is not allowed to push another defensive player. Currently, there are no limitations on offensive players pushing offensive players. So if you're going to limit the defense in any capacity, or in a specific capacity, then I think you should also limit the offense in a specific capacity. Otherwise, you are going to get a completely unleveraged play. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Okay, when you explain it that way, that may be something I could get behind. However, I'm going to hope that you apply the same logic to our next topic of debate, which is the Detroit Lions' proposal to eliminate automatic first downs on defensive holding penalties and illegal contact. So, not pass interference, mind you, just defensive holding and illegal contact, which both are 5-yard penalties that at this point in time come with an automatic first down. The Lions want to eliminate that first down, just make it a 5-yard penalty. What are your thoughts on that?
So, real quick, as a rules expert, I want to break down the difference between holding and pass interference. Holding is when you are grabbing the jersey before the ball is thrown. Pass interference is, of course, when the ball is coming towards you. You're interrupting the pass.
The ball's in the air.
You're interfering with the pass. Yeah, ball is in the air. If it was holding before the ball's in the air, it's going to be a holding call. Can you explain illegal contact for us, real quick?
Illegal contact would be how it's called on the offense is like a pick play. The same thing. If a defender runs into an offensive player impeding his route, not necessarily a grab, but an impediment of the route, that would be illegal contact.
So it's not a holding and it's not a pass interference, but it is impeding.
Right. The ball is not in the air, but
illegally.
Brian Branch, for example, runs in to Keenan Allen, prevents him from running his route, doesn't grab, doesn't hold, the ball's not in the air, but Keenan Allen falls over. That would be illegal contact.
Mm-hmm. The reason that I disagree with the Detroit Lions is because in a scenario where there's holding, someone can say, well, listen, if he didn't hold, the guy would have broke away and scored a touchdown. And maybe he's true, maybe he's not. On the same side, you could say that the hold is a tug of the jersey, but it barely affected the play. And they could be true. It could be not true. That's why it's an automatic first down. There's a trade-off because maybe if he's not held, he does break for an 80-yard touchdown. Or maybe nothing happens. That's why there's a trade-off with it only being 5 yards, but an automatic first down. And because there are situations where if you're 10, 15 yards off away from the line of scrimmage, or at any point off the line of scrimmage, and a defender knows he's going to get beat, so he just pulls the guy so he doesn't get beat, there are times where that definitely would possibly take away a long play. And I think if you're doing something to illegally prevent a long play, that needs to be an automatic first down.
Okay, I see that. However, I look at this almost in a fairness aspect, similar to how you looked at the other rule change. So currently, offensive holding, I'm going to pivot for a second away from defensive holding. Mm-hmm. Offensive holding is a 10-yard penalty, no loss of down. So you just get to redo the play 10 yards further back. In my opinion, if you're going to have a defensive penalty that gives you an automatic first down every time, no matter the severity, it could be 3rd and 17 and a grab at the line of scrimmage that could result in nothing. It instantly gives a first down. It gives so much power to the refs. And if the NFL is in the interest of doing what the fans want and taking power away from the refs and taking the refs' ability to control the end of game scenarios, as a Chiefs fan, you know a lot about this. The refs have controlled end of game scenarios, and it's annoying as a fan of the winning team and the losing team. So if you're going to give refs that power, at least make it fair. The refs do not currently have the power to make the offense lose a down over a holding penalty. Why do they have the power to gift the offense a first down when the defense commits a holding penalty. Last year, there were 225 defensive holdings that gave the team a first down when they had more than 5 to go. So basically, gifted them a first down. 225 instances. I don't think that's fair, and I think it's led to the decline of man coverage in the NFL. And I personally like watching man coverage. I like watching best corner on best receiver. Go at it.
I don't agree with your equivalency on the offensive holding because number one, it's a 10-yard penalty, and the worst case scenario of an offensive holding being let go is the quarterback gets sacked. And that's usually about maybe a 10-yard loss anyway. That being said, though, what I want to focus on is the yardage. If you have a holding penalty only 5 yards, because 5 yards is not that much, but 10 yards is a decent amount. Then, I mentioned the trade-off. It's only 5 yards, but it's an automatic first down. So if you take away the automatic first down aspect to it, then you need to make defensive holding a tougher penalty. You need to make it at least 10 yards.
See,
because in college, it's 10 yards. In college football, it's a 10-yard penalty.
See, I think that there's clearly a discrepancy between defensive holding and offensive holding. Right now, they're treated like two different penalties when they're pretty much the same. So we have to make it fair in some way. We either have to make offensive holding a loss of down, or we have to make defensive holding not an automatic first down and extend the yardage a little bit. Currently, the Lions' proposal doesn't include an extension of yardage. So it would disproportionately benefit teams playing man coverage because let's say you get to a 3rd and 17 scenario, you have a chance to hold 3 times or 2 times and still have a 3rd down scenario as defense. That's kind of what this automatic first down was designed to prevent. And I think that right now it's given too much power to the rest and end of game scenarios to extend drives of other teams in a controversial way. It's a subjective penalty that's really difficult to enforce, really difficult to see. And so when you see teams getting easy first downs late in game, fans don't like it on either side. So I think something must be done. And whether that's an extension of yardage or whether that's eliminating the automatic first down, I think that defensive holding is absolutely in a not a good spot right now in terms of competitiveness for the NFL.
And that's fair. I would be okay if the language said 10-yard penalty and eliminate automatic first down, but just as it stands, eliminate the automatic first down, I would be against. But if they added the extended yardage to it, I would be a lot more open to that.
Gotcha. As long as we agree that defensive holding as it stands right now is not in a good spot. It just allows for too much subjectivity and too much impact on the game.
And that's fair. It's not a perfect system by any means, but I don't think that the current rule proposal makes it better.
Okay. Gotcha. So I think that's going to be the conclusion of the debate. We could go on for 3 hours if we wanted to, going back and forth. But we have other topics to cover today.
And we have.
Yeah. I brought that up. I was hoping you'd say something like that. And we have. But
yeah, for the viewers, just so the viewers know, we have gone on for hours.
And hopefully maybe we'll air one of those at some point, maybe our Matt Castle debate. But moving on to our next topic, we're going to talk contracts, specifically starting with incentives. So we hear a lot about contracts signed in the offseason that are up to a certain amount of money. But what does that even mean? How can a contract be up to a certain amount of money? And why are cap hits so different from that reported number? Well, it has everything to do with how incentives work. And so before we jump into an example of those contracts, I'm going to cover how those incentives work for you guys real quick. So there are 2 different types of incentives. The first one is a likely to be earned incentive. These are performance-based incentives that are based on statistics that were achieved in the prior season. And the key word there is achieved. So for example, if you had a player that's a free agent coming off a 10-sack season and you make an incentive-based contract that has 10 sacks included in a clause, that would be a likely to be earned incentive because the player just hit 10 sacks. That means that this incentive, let's just say $2 million, would count against the team's cap. So it would be guaranteed money regardless of whether he achieves it or not. It would count against the cap because it was likely to be earned. Okay. it basically prevents you from signing Patrick Mahomes to a $100 million incentive of throw for one passing yard. He's clearly done that already, so it's a likely to be earned incentive. He's going to do it. Okay, so it's going
And
to
so
count
a
against the
likely
cap.
to be incentive does go against the cap.
That's right.
Okay.
On the contrary, there is a different type of incentive called a not likely to be earned incentive. So let's say you had a running back that rushed for 500 yards last year. Maybe he got injured. Maybe he wasn't good enough. He wasn't getting enough snap counts. He just didn't reach 1,000 yards. You could sign that running back to a contract that included an incentive of reach 1,000 yards. And since he was not able to achieve that statistic in the prior season, that incentive would fall under not likely to be earned. So that incentive, even if he reaches it, won't be counted against this year's cap number. So you could sign a veteran running back who hasn't achieved 1,000 yards, and in order to kind of get him to come to your team, you could offer him $4 million if he runs for 1,000 yards. And as long as he hadn't ran for 1,000 yards in the last season, he wouldn't count against the cap. You could get him for much cheaper in terms of cap room as opposed to actual money the team is paying. There's a big difference between money that the players actually get and the cap space or the cap hit that those players have. And we'll cover that in a second as
And
we move on to the next slide here.
so real quick, so an example of a not likely to be earned, as an example, like let's say Joe Burrow has a $10 million incentive to throw 50 touchdowns. Because he's not thrown 50 touchdowns, or at least in last year, if he throws 50 touchdowns, that money would not go against the Bengals cap space.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
And so moving on to an example, I'm going to briefly go over it, and then Tyler's going to ask me some questions here to help hopefully answer all of the contract questions that everyone's been having this offseason. But the basics that make up a contract are salary, signing bonus, per game roster bonus, any incentives, and void years. So we're going to take a look, for an example, at Marcus Davenport's contract with the Detroit Lions this year. So this year, it was reported early on that Marcus Davenport signed a 1-year up to $4.75 million contract. However, that contract featured a fully guaranteed salary of $1.35 million, a fully guaranteed signing bonus of $300K, and a per game roster bonus of $850K total, or $50,000 per game. And then incentives worth up to $2 million. And no void years. And we'll get to void years in a second. However, Marcus Davenport's cap hit is only $1.75 million. How can that be? The total money there is $4.75. Well, he only played in 2 games last year, so he only earns 2 of those $50K roster bonuses, or $100,000 total. And so once you add that to the salary and the signing bonus, it's just $1.75 million. So the Lions are getting a guy who could be paid by the Detroit Lions organization $4.75 million at a cap price of 1.75. That's at least the minimum he could make. If he just gets injured on the first play, doesn't play another down, he will get that much money.
So in terms of that per game roster bonus, only 100,000 is likely to be expected because he only played in a couple games, while Patrick Mahomes having a per game roster bonus, all of that would be likely to be earned.
Actually, only 16 games of Patrick Mahomes' roster bonus this year would be likely to be earned because he did not play in one of the games last year. If you remember, he was benched against the Denver
Oh, that's
Broncos in
right.
Week 18. So whatever his per game roster bonus's number is, I'm sure it's higher than Marcus Davenport's 50K per game. Only 16 games of that would be likely to be earned, and those likely to be earned incentives, as we just covered, are all included on the salary cap number, whereas the not likely to be earned, i.e., Marcus Davenport's $2 million in incentives, likely including sacks. Marcus Davenport did not record a full sack last season, so any sack incentive is going to not be in that category of not likely to be earned because he didn't achieve anything last year. So all of those incentives will not count against his cap for this season.
And so my last question with the likely to be earned, the whether it's likely or unlikely is all based on just the previous years.
That is
Just the
correct.
previous
According
season.
to my sources, it is just the previous year that counts in that. So a
Okay.
lot of this comes into effect when you're signing 1-year contracts. When you're signing 1-year contracts, you look at just the prior year and everything that he achieved. But from what I researched, yes, it's just the prior year that you look at. Some multi-year deals can have annual
Okay.
extensions that get more and more complicated, but we're just doing a basic, super easy to understand contract for this little crash course into contracts right now.
And then, so getting into void years, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but a void year is where a player has a contract, but the team can opt to not pay him for those years by releasing him.
I'm actually going to correct you. That's wrong. Void years
Oh,
are something different. Void years are basically dummy years added onto the end of the deal that allow teams to spread to spread signing bonus over multiple seasons to make the impact on the salary cap less. So, for example, Mike Evans signed a 2-year extension back in 2024. He's only going to be playing on the Buccaneers for 2 years per that contract. However, his contract includes an additional 3 years of void years. Pardon my cat. um,
a
that
little guest appearance
allow
this week.
Yeah, Peanut the cat guest appearance. But the void years are spread over those last 3 years of the contract. So it allows that signing bonus to be less when he's actually playing. And it's basically like doing a restructure before the contract is signed because it spreads all that money in years later after he may not even be playing on the roster anymore. So it may seem stupid at first that a guy could be being paid 3 years after he's off the roster, but during the time he's on the roster, he's getting paid less and they have more money in their cap to sign more players to build around him, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the void years is basically a way to help lower the cap hit year by year. So instead of
Exactly.
having a $16 million cap hit for 1 year, you could potentially have a $4 million cap hit for 4 years,
Exactly. That's
making
a
each
perfect
year easier.
explanation of it. Yep. You're prorating that salary over multiple years as opposed to loading it all in one, lessening the cap burden on a team. So if you ever see a void year added in a contract, that's what it is. It's just adding extra years to spread out that salary or that signing bonus over multiple seasons, even if the player may not be playing during those seasons.
Okay. And so each year, a general manager's sole job is to make sure that they have under a certain cap of money being spent. What happens if a team just says, "No, I don't care. I'll pay more."
That's a good question. So, what if a team just blows through their cap limit? So, the first penalty that would be levied would be fines against the organization. And depending on how far over the cap you go, the NFL could go as far as to take away draft picks, similar to how the NFL can take away draft picks for teams tampering with free agents early, as they did with the Falcons and Kirk Cousins last year. We don't see a lot of teams be uncap compliant and have draft picks taken away, but it does happen. And it's one of it's the most severe penalty to being over the cap. That's why you don't want to be over the cap, especially because draft picks are basically cheap contracts. You're paying that guy a rookie salary, so you don't want to lose draft picks when you're already not cap compliant. It's like a double homicide. You don't want it.
Um, so you mentioned, with kind of going back to void years a little bit, you mentioned it's a restructure before restructure. Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones have both restructured their contracts this year, freeing up $50 million in cap space this year. Can you break down what that means? Like, is that just gone? Is that never going to come back into play?
Not exactly. So, what a restructure is taking money from that salary bucket and putting it into the signing bonus bucket and spreading it over however many years are left on that contract. So that's
The
another
signing
advantage.
bonus does go against the cap, correct?
Absolutely, yes. Not only
Okay.
does it go against the cap, it's fully guaranteed to the player most of the time. So it makes cutting players even harder if you restructure their deals since you're converting that salary to signing bonus. But how it freed up cap space for the Chiefs this season was it basically took all of the available signing bonus from both Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones's contract and spread it out over the rest of their years in their contract. So while it lowered the cap space that Mahomes takes up this season, it actually raised significantly the cap space that Mahomes takes for the rest of his contract. He has something like a $30 million cap hit this year, and that cap hit balloons to $78 million next season. So the Chiefs are going to have to do some
Did you say
serious finagling.
78?
$78 million.
$78 million is
Oh, yeah.
crazy.
And Chris
Oh
Jones
my
goes up to
goodness.
$45 million. So 2 players next year
Gosh.
for the Chiefs are taking up over $110 million because of these restructures. Now, they could have creative ways to get around it, like not likely to be earned incentives or more restructuring, maybe adding void years on the end of their contract to spread it out more. But the Chiefs and their GM have been very creative in the way that they manage contracts over the years. However, it always looks bleak until they do their magic right before the league starts in March every year. But yeah, that's what a
In
contract
Veach we
restructure is.
trust.
And see, in Detroit, we say let Brad Holmes cook, but that's okay.
Each fan base has their own thing.
Fair enough. But that is the end of our topics today. A little bit of a shorter video, but we did want to make sure that we preview our draft content coming the next 4 weeks. We plan on breaking down 2 divisions per week, every week leading up to the draft here at the end of April. And then on the night before the draft, we're going to do a live stream of us doing mock drafts for our own team, a full first round mock draft for every team, and just some other fun screw around mock drafts that maybe take suggestions from you guys. But just have that on your radar night before the draft, big mock draft live stream. But be on the lookout for our draft coverage coming soon.
Again, that's going to be Wednesday, April 23rd, the night before the draft. We're going to do a live mock draft. And in terms of contracts, last thing about that, if you guys still have another question that I didn't ask or something that we said that was still confusing, please leave your questions in the comments, and we're going to make sure we address that first thing next week.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're going to take 5 minutes and answer all of your contract questions just to make sure everyone understands contracts before the start of the draft stuff. But thank you all for watching. We appreciate it, and we're excited to see you guys next week for draft coverage starting. Take care.